The saloon reeked of whiskey and desperation, but nothing compared to the smell of fear coming off Jonas Hartwell as he laid down his final bet. 2 wicker baskets sat on the poker table between stacks of coins and crumpled bills, and from inside came the soft whimpers that made every man in that smoky room look away. "I'm all in," Jonas slurred, his bloodshot eyes wild with drink and something worse, pure evil. 2 healthy baby girls, fresh from their dead mama's arms, worth more than gold to the right buyer? The other players folded their cards in disgust, chairs scraping against the wooden floor as they backed away from the table. All except one man. Silas McCready sat perfectly still, his weathered hands trembling not from fear, but from a rage so deep it made his vision blur. He'd buried his own child just 3 months ago, a little girl who never drew her first breath, and here was this devil gambling away 2 innocent souls like they were cattle. Before we jump back in, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in Texas, afternoon in Canada, or evening in Germany. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are, and if this story touches you, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. Now, let's dive into the story. "You can't bet children," the bartender growled from behind the bar, but his voice carried no real authority. This was Coyote Flats, Nevada, where the law was whatever the strongest man said it was, and tonight Jonas Hartwell held a loaded Colt .45 on his hip. The year was 1882, and out here in the desert, terrible things happened when good men stayed silent. Silas looked down at his cards. A pair of 3s, nothing special. Then he looked at what he had left to wager. $17, his father's silver cross, and a deed to a broken-down ranch nobody wanted. The babies cried louder, and something inside Silas snapped like a dry twig under a boot. "I'll take that bet," he heard himself say, his voice cutting through the saloon like a knife. The room went dead quiet, except for those tiny cries that would haunt him forever if he walked away now. Jonas grinned, showing teeth stained brown from tobacco. "You ain't got enough to match my wager, old man. These girls are pure blood. Their mama was quality folk before the fever took her." Silas stood slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a long shadow across the table in the lamplight. At 43, he was all sharp angles and hard living, a man carved down to nothing but gristle and determination by loss and loneliness. "I got $17, this cross that belonged to my father who died in the war, and a deed to Willow Creek Ranch up on Eagle Ridge." He paused, then added the words that would change everything. "And I got my word as a Christian man that if I lose, I'll work your fields for 5 years, no pay." The crowd murmured. 5 years of free labor was worth a fortune. Jonas's greedy eyes lit up like a coyote spotting a wounded rabbit. The dealer, an old man named Murphy with hands that shook from palsy, looked between them with horror. "This ain't right! You can't!" But Jonas slammed his fist on the table, making the baskets jump, and the babies wail louder. "Deal the cards, or I'll find someone who will." Murphy dealt with tears running down his weathered cheeks, each card falling like a nail in a coffin. The saloon had filled with onlookers now, men pressed against the windows, everyone holding their breath as Silas McCready, a man who'd lost everything including hope, played for the lives of 2 abandoned girls. Jonas showed his hand first. 2 pairs, kings and 7s. A good hand, strong enough to win most nights. His laugh was ugly, already counting his 5 years of free labor. But when Silas turned over his cards, the laugh died in Jonas's throat. 3 threes, helped by the turn of the river card. 3 of a kind beats 2 pair, Murphy whispered, his voice cracking with relief. Silas moved before Jonas could react, scooping up both baskets with the gentleness of a man handling spun glass. The babies were so small, wrapped in dirty cloth that might have once been white, their faces red from crying but perfect in every way that mattered. "You cheated!" Jonas roared, reaching for his gun, but 3 other men had already drawn on him. The bartender, the preacher, who'd been drinking quietly in the corner, and young Deputy Tom Curtis, who'd been pretending to be asleep. "The game was fair," the preacher said firmly. "Witnessed by all. Those children belong to McCready now. Legal as any claim." Jonas backed toward the door, his face twisted with fury. "This ain't over, McCready. Those girls are worth money to certain people who don't forget." But Silas wasn't listening. He was looking down at 2 pairs of eyes, one blue as a mountain lake, one green as spring grass, that gazed up at him with absolute trust, seeing not a broken-down rancher with empty pockets, but the man who'd saved them from hell. 6 hours earlier, Silas McCready had ridden into Coyote Flats with nothing but grief for company and $17 to buy supplies that might last him through winter. The town sat like a brown scab on the Nevada desert, all dust and disappointed dreams, the kind of place where men went to forget or be forgotten. His horse, Moses, was as tired as he was, ribs showing through a dull coat that hadn't seen a proper brushing in weeks. Silas hadn't meant to stop at the Broken Wheel Saloon. He'd sworn off drinking after Margaret died, but something pulled him toward those bat-wing doors like invisible hands. Maybe it was God, maybe it was the devil, or maybe it was just the bone-deep loneliness that made a man do foolish things. He'd tied Moses to the post and walked in, just planning to buy some jerky and hardtack from Sam the bartender, who sold provisions on the side. The ranch waiting for him up on Eagle Ridge was nothing but broken fences and shattered dreams now. Willow Creek had dried up 2 summers back, taking his cattle and his will to live with it. Margaret had tried to keep his spirits up, even as her belly grew round with their first child. But the baby came too early on a night when the doctor was 20 miles away, drunk in some other town. Silas had held his daughter for exactly 3 minutes before she stopped breathing, her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. Margaret followed her to heaven 2 days later, fever taking what grief hadn't already claimed. The preacher said God had a plan, but Silas figured if God had planned this, then God was either cruel or absent. He'd spent 3 months alone in that cabin, talking to shadows and empty chairs, until the silence got so loud he had to leave or put his father's pistol in his mouth. That's when he'd heard the crying from the back room of the saloon, not the wailing of a grown man who'd lost at cards, but the pure, desperate sound of babies needing comfort. Through the doorway, he'd seen Jonas Hartwell stumbling around with 2 baskets, cursing at the infants to shut up while he tried to count money with shaking hands. Sam the bartender had tried to explain in hushed tones. "Their mama died this morning, Sarah Donnelly from the boarding house. Jonas claims he's their father, but everyone knows Sarah would never let that snake near her. He probably just found them after she passed and figured he could sell them." The words hit Silas like cold water. Sell them, like they were horses or mining claims, not living souls who deserved love and protection. He'd watched Jonas carry the baskets to the poker table, already drunk on whiskey and greed, and something ancient and protective woke up in Silas's chest. He'd sat down at that poker table with no plan except to watch, to make sure those babies weren't hurt. But as the night wore on and Jonas got drunker and meaner, slapping the baskets when the girls cried. Silas knew he couldn't just witness this evil. He had to stop it. The other players were traveling men, salesmen and drifters with no stake in this town's sins. They folded hand after hand, uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. Jonas kept raising the stakes, driving everyone out until only he and Silas remained. "You still here, McCready?" Jonas had sneered. "Thought you'd given up on living after your woman died. Why don't you go back to your dead ranch and leave the real living to men who still got blood in their veins?" The insult was meant to drive him away, but it had the opposite effect. Silas felt blood all right, hot and angry, and pumping through his heart for the first time in months. When Jonas had finally declared his evil wager, the babies for everything Silas had, the saloon had gone silent as a grave. Sam dropped a glass that shattered on the floor, the sound like breaking bones. The preacher, Reverend Cole, stood up from his corner table, his face pale with shock. "You can't do this, Hartwell." "It's ungodly." But Jonas just laughed, that horrible sound that would haunt Silas's dreams. "God ain't in Coyote Flats, preacher." "Haven't you noticed?" And maybe he was right about God being absent, but Silas figured even if the Almighty had abandoned this place, somebody had to stand in his stead. When he'd said those words, "I'll take that bet," he'd felt Margaret's presence so strongly, it was like she was standing right behind him, her hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Save them, Silas. Save them like you couldn't save ours." The ride back to Eagle Ridge should have taken 3 hours, but with 2 baskets balanced carefully across Moses's saddle, Silas made it last 5. Every bump in the trail made him slow down. Every cry from the girls made him stop to check their wrappings. The sun was coming up over the mountains, painting the desert gold and pink, and for the first time in months, Silas noticed how beautiful it was. "Your mama must have loved you something fierce," he told the babies, though they were too young to understand. "Sarah Donnelly was a good woman, worked hard at the boarding house, never complained even when times got lean. You got her strength in you, I can tell." The blue-eyed one had stopped crying, seeming to listen to his voice, while the green-eyed one slept with her thumb in her mouth. They couldn't have been more than 2 months old, maybe 3, still that fresh-from-heaven age where they trusted the world completely. The cabin looked worse than he remembered, door hanging crooked, windows dusty, the garden Margaret had loved now nothing but dead stalks and tumbleweeds. But Silas saw it differently now, saw it through the lens of necessity. This wouldn't be a tomb anymore. It would be a home. He carried the girls inside, setting them gently on the bed he'd shared with Margaret, then stood back and really looked at his situation. He had $17, no milk, no proper baby supplies, and no idea how to care for infants. But he also had something he hadn't possessed in months: purpose. "First things first," he said aloud, because the silence didn't seem so heavy with the girls there. "You need names. Can't keep calling you Blue Eyes and Green Eyes." He studied them in the morning light streaming through the dirty window, these 2 sisters who'd lost everything before they could even know what they had. "Faith," he said to the blue-eyed one, who was watching him with that serious expression babies sometimes wore, like they knew secrets about the universe. "Because it took faith to win you, and faith to believe I can do right by you." Then he turned to the green-eyed girl, who'd woken up and was making soft cooing sounds. "And you'll be Grace, because that's what you are. Grace I don't deserve but got anyway." Faith and Grace. The names felt right, solid, like they'd been waiting for these girls all along. Silas knew Sarah had probably chosen other names, but those names had died with her, and these children needed to start fresh. He touched the silver cross hanging around his neck, his father's cross that he'd almost gambled away. "Lord, I haven't talked to you since Margaret died. Figured you weren't listening or didn't care. But these girls need more than I got to give, so if you're paying any attention at all, now would be a good time to prove it." As if in answer, he heard horses approaching. His hand went to his gun, thinking of Jonas's threats, but the riders coming up the trail were familiar faces: Sam the bartender, Reverend Cole, and Tom Curtis the deputy, along with Mrs. Chen from the general store and 2 other women from town. They were loaded down with supplies: canned milk, clean cloth for diapers, bottles, blankets, and even a wooden cradle that looked handmade. "Figured you might need some help," Sam said gruffly, dismounting with a grace that belied his thick middle. Mrs. Chen pushed past them all, immediately taking charge. "Men don't know nothing about babies. Move aside, McCready." She scooped up Faith with practiced ease, checking her over with expert hands. "Healthy but hungry. When did they last eat?" Silas felt overwhelmed by the sudden invasion of kindness. "I don't know. Jonas had them since morning when Sarah died." The women took over his cabin like a gentle army, heating water, mixing formula from canned milk and sugar, changing the girls into clean clothes that appeared from mysterious bundles. Reverend Cole pulled Silas aside while the chaos swirled. "What you did last night was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen." Silas watched Mrs. Chen teaching one of the younger women how to properly hold a bottle for grace. "Maybe both, Reverend." The preacher nodded slowly. "Jonas Hartwell won't let this go. He owes money to some bad people, was counting on selling those girls to clear his debts." The word selling still made Silas's stomach turn. "Over my dead body!" Reverend Cole gripped his shoulder. "That's what I'm afraid of. But you won't stand alone. This town's got more good people than bad. We just sometimes forget to show it." As the sun climbed higher, filling the cabin with light and life and the sound of babies being properly tended, Silas felt something he hadn't experienced since before Margaret got sick. He felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Broken Wheel, and Silas had fallen into a rhythm that would have been comical if it wasn't so exhausting. Faith liked to be held facing outward so she could see everything, while Grace wanted to be cradled close, her little fist always grabbing for his shirt. He'd learned to change diapers with the speed of a gunslinger, to warm bottles to just the right temperature, and to function on 2 hours of sleep scattered throughout the day. The good folks of Coyote Flats took turns riding up to Eagle Ridge with supplies and help. Mrs. Chen on Mondays, Sam's wife Dorothy on Wednesdays, and usually one of the church ladies on Fridays. But it was on a Thursday, the one day he had no help coming when the stranger arrived. She rode a painted mare, sitting straight-backed in a way that spoke of Eastern education, her dark hair pinned up under a proper hat despite the desert heat. Silas was on the porch with both girls, trying to rock them to sleep, when she dismounted at his gate. "Mr. McCready." Her voice was cultured but tired, like she'd been traveling hard for days. "My name is Emma Sheridan. I believe you have my nieces." The words hit him like a physical blow, and he instinctively held the girls tighter. Emma seemed to understand his reaction because she raised both hands peacefully. "I'm not here to take them. Not yet, anyway. I just need to know they're safe." She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25, with Sarah Donnelly's same determined chin and intelligent eyes. "Sarah was my older sister. I got word of her death 2 weeks ago in San Francisco. Came as fast as I could." She pulled papers from her saddlebag, letters in Sarah's handwriting, a photograph of two young women who were clearly sisters. She wrote me about the girls when they were born, said their father had abandoned them. She never mentioned Jonas Hartwell, so I don't know what claim he thought he had. Silas studied her carefully, looking for deception, but finding only exhaustion and grief. Jonas had no claim except what he took. Your sister would never have let him near these girls. Emma's face hardened. I know what kind of man Jonas Hartwell is. He courted me briefly 2 years ago, before I learned about his gambling and his temper. Sarah must have been desperate to stay in the same town as him. She moved closer slowly, like approaching spooked horses. May I? Silas reluctantly let her take Grace, watching how she held the baby with natural ease. Grace immediately grabbed for Emma's hair, pulling a pin loose, and for the first time since arriving, Emma smiled. She looks just like Sarah did as a baby. Mama always said Sarah came out grabbing for everything she could reach. The pain in her voice was fresh, the kind that hadn't scarred over yet. And this must be Faith, she said, looking at the blue-eyed girl in Silas's arms. She has our father's eyes. He was a sea captain, died when we were young. Why didn't Sarah go to you when she got sick? Silas asked, genuinely curious. Emma's face clouded with regret. We quarreled before she left San Francisco. I wanted her to marry a banker, someone stable. She wanted to marry for love. She chose a traveling man named William Porter, followed him here, but he died in a mining accident before the girls were born. Sarah was too proud to come back, to admit I might have been right about choosing security over passion. She kissed Grace's forehead tenderly. I would have taken her in anyway, would have loved these girls from the moment they drew breath. But Sarah, she always had to do things her own way. They sat on the porch in surprisingly comfortable silence, each holding a baby, while the sun started its descent toward the mountains. Finally, Emma spoke again. I have money, Mr. McCready, an inheritance from our grandmother. I could compensate you for your trouble, take the girls back to San Francisco where they'd have proper education, society, opportunities. The offer hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. A month ago, Silas would have jumped at it. He had no business raising 2 babies, no money, no experience. But now, looking at Faith's sleeping face, feeling the weight of responsibility that had somehow become precious to him, he found himself shaking his head. They're not trouble, Miss Sheridan. They're saving me, truth be told. Emma studied him for a long moment. Sarah wrote about you once, said you were the only man in Coyote Flats who treated the working women with genuine respect, said you lost your wife and child. Her voice softened. I'm sorry for your loss. Silas swallowed hard. These girls won't replace what I lost. Nothing could. But they've given me reason to keep living, and I reckon that's worth more than any compensation you could offer. Emma stood, handing Grace back to him gently. Then I have a proposition. Let me stay, not to take them, but to help raise them, to make sure they know about their mother, their heritage. I can rent a room in town, come up daily. The inheritance can help with expenses. She paused, vulnerability flickering across her composed features. They're all I have left of Sarah. Emma Sheridan proved to be as good as her word, maybe better. She rented a room at the boarding house where Sarah had worked and rode up to Eagle Ridge every morning as the sun broke over the mountains. She brought more than just help with the babies. She brought books, proper medicine, and a gentle efficiency that reminded Silas why Margaret had always said women were the ones who really civilized the West. But she also brought danger, though neither of them knew it at first. Jonas Hartwell had been lying low since that night at the saloon, but Emma's arrival stirred him like a stick in a hornet's nest. She was beautiful, educated, and clearly had money. Everything Jonas thought he deserved and couldn't have. Worse, she was spending her days with Silas McCready, the man who'd humiliated him in front of the whole town. It was Tom Curtis who brought the warning, riding up on a Saturday afternoon while Emma was teaching Silas how to make proper baby food from mashed vegetables and canned milk. "Jonas has been meeting with the Colton brothers," Tom said without preamble, accepting the cup of coffee Emma offered. "Bart and Wade Colton, up from Texas. They're the kind of men who do ugly work for the right price." Silas felt his jaw tighten. He knew the type. Men who'd lost whatever conscience they'd been born with, who saw other people as obstacles or opportunities. Nothing more. "What's he planning?" Tom shook his head. "Don't know for certain, but he's been drinking heavy and talking about what's rightfully his. Says those babies are worth $500 to a couple in California who can't have children of their own." Emma went pale. "He's selling human beings?" Tom's face was grim. "Out here, Miss Sheridan, people sell whatever they can get away with selling. The law's only as strong as the men willing to enforce it, and I'm just one deputy with a sheriff who's getting too old for real trouble." That night, after Emma had returned to town, Silas cleaned his guns with methodical precision, while the girls slept in their cradle. He had his father's Navy Colt, a Winchester rifle, and a shotgun that had belonged to Margaret's father. Not much of an arsenal against 3 men who killed for sport, but it would have to do. He was so focused on his preparations that he almost missed the soft sound of horses approaching without lanterns. His hand was on the Colt before his mind fully registered the danger. 4 riders, moving slow and careful up the trail. Silas moved to the window, keeping low, and saw them clearly in the moonlight. Jonas and 3 others, probably the Colton brothers and 1 more hired gun. They stopped just outside rifle range, and Jonas's voice carried on the still night air. "McCready, I've come for what's mine. Send out those girls and we ride away peaceful. Keep them, and things get unpleasant." Silas checked that the girls were still sleeping, then stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "These children are legally mine, Hartwell. Won at cards, witnessed by half the town. You got no claim here." Jonas laughed, ugly and sharp. "Legal don't mean much when you're dead, McCready. Ask your wife about that." The words were meant to wound, and they did, but they also filled Silas with a cold rage that steadied his hands. "You come 1 step closer to this cabin, and you'll be explaining yourself to the devil before sunrise." One of the other men, probably Bart Colton from his size, spoke up. "4 against 1 ain't good odds, mister. Why die for someone else's brats?" Before Silas could answer, another voice came from the darkness behind the cabin. "Who says it's 4 against 1? Reverend Cole stepped into view, holding a rifle with surprising competence. Then Sam emerged from the left, shotgun ready, followed by Tom Curtis from the right, his deputy's badge catching the moonlight. "Seems you miscounted, Jonas," Tom said conversationally. "And before you think about doing something stupid, you should know that Judge Harrison is aware of your plans. Try anything tonight, and you'll hang for it." The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring. Then more horses came up the trail. Mrs. Chen's husband with 2 of his cousins, the blacksmith, even old Murphy from the saloon. Word had spread through Coyote Flats that Jonas was making his move, and the town had responded. It wasn't that they all loved Silas or even knew the babies, but they'd had enough of men like Jonas thinking they owned everything they could take. "This ain't over," Jonas snarled, but he was already turning his horse. The Colton brothers followed, recognizing a lost cause when they saw one. As they rode away, Silas felt both relief and dread. Jonas was right. This wasn't over. Men like him didn't give up. They just got meaner and more creative. The fire started 3 nights later, when the wind was howling down from the mountains like a living thing. Silas woke to the smell of smoke and the orange glow flickering on his bedroom wall. The barn was ablaze, flames already licking at the cabin's east wall. He grabbed both girls from their cradle, their cries piercing the roar of fire, and stumbled onto the porch where Emma was already arriving, having seen the glow from town. "Take them!" he shouted, pushing Faith and Grace into her arms. "Get them away from here!" But Emma didn't run. She carried the girls to safety near the well, then came back with buckets, her nightgown soaked and dirty as she fought the flames beside him. Tom Curtis arrived minutes later with half the town, and they formed a bucket brigade that saved the cabin, but couldn't save the barn where Moses had been stabled. The old horse had gotten out somehow, standing near the well with his head low, singed but alive. As dawn broke over the blackened ruins, they found the evidence, a whiskey bottle that reeked of kerosene and boot prints leading toward the trail to town. Jonas's boot prints. Tom recognized the broken heel pattern. "That's enough to arrest him," the deputy said. But when they rode to the boarding house, Jonas was gone. His room was empty except for a letter addressed to Emma, the handwriting shaky with drink or rage. Emma read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You could have had me, could have been somebody. Instead, you choose to play house with a broken-down rancher and another woman's cast-offs. Those brats were my ticket out of this hellhole, and you ruined it. But there's something you should know, something Sarah never told you. Ask McCready about the night Margaret died. Ask him why the doctor was really gone." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from the ruined barn. Emma looked at Silas, confusion in her eyes. Silas felt the old shame rising like bile. "The doctor was gone because I sent him away. I was drunk that night, Emma. First time since our wedding. But I'd gotten bad news. The ranch was failing. We were going to lose everything. I thought one drink would help me think clearer. But it turned into a bottle. When Doc Morrison came to check on Margaret, I was mean drunk, accused him of being sweet on her, told him to get out and never come back. He left town that night, and when Margaret went into labor," his voice broke. "When she needed him, he was 20 miles away because of my pride and whiskey." The confession felt like ripping open an old wound. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "Sarah died because she was too proud to ask for help. You were too proud to accept it. Pride kills more people out here than bullets, Silas. But those girls don't care about your pride or your shame. They just need you present and sober. And from what I've seen, that's exactly what you've been." She was right, he realized. He hadn't touched a drop since the night he won the girls. They'd saved him from that demon without even knowing it. Tom Curtis cleared his throat. "This is all very touching, but we still got Jonas out there somewhere, and he's getting desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." As if to underscore his point, a rider came galloping up the trail, one of the church ladies, her face white with fear. "Emma, you need to come quick. There's a man at the boarding house. Says he's the girl's grandfather. Says Jonas sent him a telegram about his daughter's babies being stolen." Emma's face went hard as stone. "That's impossible. Our father died 15 years ago." The woman shook her head. "Not your father, miss. Their father's father, William Porter's dad, come from Colorado with legal papers." The ground seemed to shift under Silas's feet. If this was real, if the girls had blood family with legal claim, everything would change. Emma grabbed his arm. "We fight this together. Those papers might be forgeries. Jonas is capable of anything, and even if they're real, what judge would give babies to a grandfather they've never met over the people who've been caring for them? But Silas saw the fear in her eyes that matched his own. The law didn't always favor what was right, especially when it came to blood relations. They rode to town together, the girls bundled against Emma's chest, to face whatever new hell Jonas had conjured. The man waiting at the boarding house was old, weathered, and had eyes the exact shade of green as Grace's. The papers in his hand looked official enough to stop Silas's heart. Homer Porter was nothing like they'd expected. The old man sat in the boarding house parlor with tears streaming down his weathered face, holding Grace like she was made of spun gold, while Faith grabbed at his gray whiskers. "My boy William wrote me about the babies," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But he died before telling me where exactly he was. I've been searching for 6 months." He looked up at Emma with eyes that held no threat, only pain. "You're Sarah's sister. William wrote about you too, said you didn't approve of him." Emma's voice was careful. "I didn't know him well enough to approve or disapprove. I only wanted Sarah to be safe and provided for." Homer nodded slowly. "My boy wasn't perfect. Had wandering feet like his mother, couldn't stay in one place long. But he loved your sister true. Would have married her proper if that mine hadn't collapsed." He turned to Silas. "And you're the man who won them from that devil Hartwell. Tom Curtis told me the whole story while we waited." "Jonas sent you a telegram," Silas said, not quite a question. Homer's face darkened. "He did. Said you stole my granddaughters, that he'd been caring for them, and you took them in a rigged card game. I came ready for war." He kissed Faith's forehead gently. "But then I talked to people in town. Every single person had the same story. You saved them, McCready. You and Miss Emma been raising them like your own." The old man stood, still cradling Grace. "I'm 71 years old. My wife's dead. My son's dead. I got money saved, a good house in Denver, but what I don't got is the strength to raise 2 babies alone. I came here thinking I'd take them, give them the Porter name and heritage, but watching you two with them." He paused, seeming to wrestle with the words. "Would you consider letting me be part of their lives? Not to take them, but to be their grandpa, to visit, to help with expenses, to make sure they know about their father's side?" Before anyone could answer, the door burst open. Jonas stood there, wild-eyed and drunk, a pistol in his hand. "Where's my money, old man?" "You promised $500 if I told you where to find them." Homer's voice was cold as winter steel. "I promised nothing to a man who'd sell children. You telegraphed me hoping I'd pay you for information, but you're getting nothing except what you deserve." Jonas raised the gun, pointing it at Silas. "Then I'll take what I'm owed in blood." The shot was impossibly loud in the small room, but it wasn't Jonas's gun that fired. Emma stood behind him, smoking Derringer in her hand, having shot the pistol from his grip. Jonas howled, clutching his bleeding hand, and Tom Curtis was on him before he could move, wrestling him to the ground. "Jonas Hartwell, you're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and trafficking in human beings." As Tom dragged Jonas away, Homer looked at Emma with new respect. Where'd a lady learn to shoot like that? Emma's smile was sharp. "San Francisco isn't as civilized as people think. A woman alone needs to know how to protect herself." She turned to Silas, and her smile softened. "And how to protect what matters." That evening they sat on the porch of Silas's cabin, him, Emma, and Homer, passing the babies between them as the sun set over the blackened remains of the barn. "We could rebuild," Emma said quietly, Make this place proper again. The girls will need room to grow." Silas noticed she said, "we," not "you," and something warm bloomed in his chest. "That's a big commitment, Emma. You sure you want to tie yourself to a broken-down ranch and a gambler's luck?" She looked at him directly, those intelligent eyes holding his. "You're not a gambler, Silas. A gambler plays odds. You played with faith." Homer cleared his throat. "If you two are done dancing around it, maybe we should talk practical. I got money to rebuild the barn and fix up the cabin. You got the land and the will to work it. Emma's got education and connections in San Francisco for when the girls need schooling." He paused, grinning. "And maybe if you two got married, we could stop scandalizing the church folks with all this unchaperoned visiting." Emma blushed, but Silas found himself grinning back. "That a proposal, Homer?" The old man shrugged. "Just an observation from someone who's lived long enough to know love when he sees it. My boy would want his daughters raised by people who chose them, who fought for them. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family." The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a December morning, when frost sparkled on the sage and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Emma wore her mother's dress, altered by Mrs. Chen to fit properly, while Silas stood at the altar in his father's suit, holding faith in one arm while Homer held grace. The whole town of Coyote Flats had crowded into the small church, even old Murphy, who hadn't set foot in a church for 20 years. Reverend Cole performed the ceremony with tears in his eyes, having watched this story unfold from that terrible night at the saloon to this moment of joy. Do you, Silas McCready, take Emma Sheridan to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, in prosperity and adversity? Silas looked at Emma, remembering Margaret with love, but without the crushing guilt that had nearly killed him. Margaret would have wanted this, would have loved Emma's fierce protection of the girls. I do, with all my heart. And do you, Emma Sheridan, take Silas McCready to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, in prosperity and adversity? Emma's voice was clear and strong. I do, absolutely. When Reverend Cole pronounced them husband and wife, both babies seemed to coo in celebration, causing the whole congregation to laugh. As they walked down the aisle as a family, Tom Curtis stood at the back, his deputy's badge polished bright. Just wanted you to know, Jonas got 5 years hard labor. Judge said attempting to sell children was about the worst thing he'd seen, short of murder. It was justice of a sort, though Silas found he didn't much care about Jonas anymore. The man had been the catalyst for something beautiful, even if he'd meant only evil. The rebuilt barn stood proud against the winter sky when they returned to Eagle Ridge, now truly Willow Creek Ranch again, since Homer had paid to have a well dug that reached water even in drought. The cabin had been expanded too, with a proper nursery for the girls and a kitchen big enough for family dinners. Homer had decided to move from Denver to Coyote Flats, buying the old Hutchinson place just 2 miles away. A grandpa should be close enough to spoil his granddaughters proper, he'd said, and neither Silas nor Emma had argued. That first night as a married couple, after the girls were asleep and the house was quiet, Emma and Silas stood on the porch looking at the stars. "Do you ever think about how different this all could have been?" Emma asked. "If you hadn't walked into that saloon, if Jonas hadn't made that evil bet, if I hadn't come looking for them." Silas pulled her close, feeling the solid reality of her against him. "I used to think life was like poker, all chance and luck, and playing the hand you're dealt. But now, I think maybe it's more like what Homer said. We choose our family. We choose to fight for what matters. Those girls didn't save me, Emma. The choice to save them did. She turned in his arms, moonlight making her eyes shine. And my choice to stay? He kissed her then, soft and sure. That saved us all. Inside, one of the girls started crying. They never could tell which one started it, and soon both were awake. But instead of frustration, Silas felt only gratitude. They went inside together to tend to their daughters, because that's what Faith and Grace were now. Not his, not hers, but theirs. 5 years later, the Willow Creek Ranch was known throughout Nevada as one of the finest horse operations in the state. Silas had discovered he had a gift for training horses, while Emma's head for business kept them profitable even in lean times. Faith and Grace, now 5 years old, were inseparable terrors who could ride before they could properly write their names. Faith had Silas's stubborn streak and Emma's quick mind, while Grace had inherited some mysterious porter wildness that kept everyone on their toes. Homer lived long enough to see them start school, to teach them to fish in the creek that ran strong, thanks to the well, and to tell them stories about their birth parents that made Sarah and William seem like heroes from a fairy tale. When he passed peacefully in his sleep one spring morning, the whole town mourned a man who'd become everybody's grandfather. Jonas Hartwell died in prison, killed by another inmate over a gambling debt, a fitting end for a man who'd wagered everything on cruelty. But by then, his shadow had long since lifted from their lives. The Broken Wheel Saloon had become the Broken Wheel General Store, run by Sam and his wife, though old-timers still told the story of the night a broken man won 2 babies in a poker game and found his salvation. Reverend Cole officiated at the baptism of Silas and Emma's son, born 3 years after the wedding, whom they named William Homer McCready. The boy grew up calling Faith and Grace his sisters, never knowing any different, never needing to. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were playing in the yard, Silas would sometimes take out his father's old deck of cards. He'd shuffle them absently, thinking about that night when everything changed. Emma would watch him, understanding without words that he wasn't mourning the past, but marveling at the present. "Good hand," she'd ask, and he'd look at his family, chosen, fought for, and cherished, and answer the same way every time. "The best hand I ever played." The story of Willow Creek Ranch became legend in that part of Nevada, told in saloons and churches alike. How a man with nothing but grief and $17 had bet everything on saving 2 abandoned girls. How a woman from San Francisco had chosen love over comfort. How a grandfather had picked legacy over possession. How a town had stood together against evil. But mostly, it was the story of Faith and Grace, who grew up to be teachers, mothers, and pillars of their community, never doubting they were loved because they'd been chosen, fought for, and won in the most unlikely way. They kept their father's silver cross and their mother's derringer, passing them down through generations along with the truth. That family isn't about blood or birth, but about showing up when the stakes are highest and choosing love when hate would be easier. And in the end, that's what matters when the last card falls. Not the hand you're dealt, but how you choose to play it. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop a comment below, and let me know if this story touched your heart like it touched mine.